Have you ever heard of elder financial abuse? Did you know that it is the most common form of financial abuse in Canada? And when it happens, it's most likely done by someone close to the senior, such as an adult child or caregiver. And unfortunately, it's very hard to detect for reasons that we will be discussing today. The investment industry has started to take steps to protect older investors and has now put in place a category named the trusted person contact. And this is for investment account. Now, the person does not have the authority to trade on the account or even know how much money there is in the account, but they are there to help protect you if your advisor has concerns about financial exploitation or your well-being. So, to educate us on elder financial abuse and ways to protect you and your loved ones, I'm joined by Erin MacKenzie. Erin's the CEO and co-founder of Lighthouse Registry, which is a platform that helps protect seniors against elder financial abuse. Erin, welcome. I'm so excited to speak to you about this today.
Thank you so much for having me, Liz.
So let's begin, because a lot of people don't know what this is. What exactly is elder financial abuse?
At a high level, elder financial abuse is anybody who takes money from a senior or other assets without the senior's informed consent. So it can range from anything from a few dollars to several $1,000,000. It can include a wide range of assets from checking accounts, investments, real estate, homes, properties, and it can be perpetrated really by anyone. So essentially, it could be phone scammers, which is what a lot of people assume it is, but also adult children and trusted people who are close to the person and trusted by them.
And that is awful, because these people are entrusted. I mean, why would you think that a child or someone who's close to you, who's supposed to be taking care of you, will actually be stealing from you?
So I think it's more like a crime of opportunity. So I think that what happens is adult children, when they're taking care of their parents and they're put in a position where they might have control of assets, they might have access to assets, they see an opportunity and they just take advantage of it. So it's not an intentional thing. People don't necessarily, in all cases, mean to take money from their parents. But when they're put in a position of power and there's not really anybody supervising them or watching them, they may take advantage of that opportunity.
That's heartbreaking.
It is.
And the other thing I want to talk about right now, I mean, we're talking about elder financial abuse, but the trusted person contact, because this is very new in Canada.
Mm-hmm. So they introduced it in the US a few years ago. It's new to Canada. It just came in place January 1st of this year. And essentially, anybody who's an IROC registrant, so essentially your investment advisors, your wealth managers, anybody who's really handling your money has to ask you about whether or not you want to put a trusted contact person on your account. And essentially what that is it's someone who, your financial services professionals, if they have questions about a transaction or your well-being, or they have some concerns you're possibly being taken advantage of, that they can contact that person to basically find out more about what's going on and basically make sure that sort of what's happening is legitimate. They're not being taken advantage of. So they don't have any powers, though, to control your account. They don't get any information about what access or what assets you own. It's basically just this person can provide context that helps the professional make a decision in terms of how they're taking care of you.
So what do people get most wrong about elder financial abuse?
Usually when I talk to people about it, their first instinct is, oh, phone scam, because everybody assumes that it's a random person calling you on the phone. And I know that that's a major problem. I know it's something that you're very, very passionate about taking care of. But with elder financial abuse, that's actually not the biggest problem. Really, the biggest abuses are a family member, a close family member, usually an adult child or caregiver, stealing from their parents.
So I know about phone scams, and they're so easy for seniors because a lot of them are at home alone, and they want to speak to somebody.
They do.
They're lonely. So when you have the scammer call, I mean, what do? Scammers become your best friend, because they know that it's in their best interest to befriend somebody who's lonely and start stealing from them. But how did you come across this problem to begin with?
So I used to be a lawyer. I was practicing state litigation, and one of my earliest cases, it was a case of very serious elder financial abuse. So essentially, an elderly woman, her husband had passed away, and she had just recently passed away as well. And essentially what happened was, after she died, her kids realized that there was almost nothing left in her estate, and the house had actually been transferred into one of their siblings' names, which was a huge surprise to all of them. So essentially, we backed up, and what we realized was that although the mother had done the right thing, she had a power of attorney, she assigned it to her two oldest children jointly, no one knew that the youngest daughter had swooped in, forced mom to sign new paperwork, and basically she took advantage of her mom that way.
So we will be right back with more examples of elder financial abuse. we're discussing elder financial abuse, the trusted person contact, and how to recognize and prevent it. Now, before break, Erin, we were talking about an example. Do you have any other examples? The reason why I want to know about examples is because it resonates with people. People remember stories, and if it resonates, it'll help them with red flags.
There are so many horror stories. Recently, I think just in August, there was a story in the CBC News nationally. It was an elderly woman in Newfoundland, and she had sold her house to her daughter and son-in-law for $1 with the promise that they were going to take care of her in her old age. Essentially, they were doing that, but they were also doing a few other things like stealing money from her, using her debit card, using her credit card, loaning those cards to other people. And then it was only discovered when she ended up in the hospital, and she asked one of her other children to go check on some banking for her, and they realized there's only $500 left in her account.
Oof.
So that, unfortunately, is a fairly common situation. Like that's generally how people find out about it. Either they run out of money, or the person passes away and the estate has far less assets or far fewer assets than you would have expected in it. Another case that I use a lot in the examples that I talk about when I talk about my business comes from a case study in the States, and it was elderly woman, her husband had mild dementia, so the daughter wanted to help out. So she ended up becoming joint with her parents on their bank account, which is something people do as a workaround. It's not a best practice, though, because what happens is when you become joint on an account, it actually changes the ownership of the account. So it's important to know what you're doing when you actually do become joint. But then the mother ended up having some trouble. So she ended up in the hospital. She'd had a stroke, I think, and had some other injuries. So the daughter went in and had mom sign a new power of attorney, which the daughter immediately used to transfer the house into her own name and take about $600,000 from her mom, which she used for country club memberships, paying her mortgage, a couple other things. The money never got recovered, and it wasn't discovered until she tried to take out another $500,000. And that's when the son found out. So usually when someone else finds out about it, that's when the stuff comes to light. But until then, this basically happens in the shadows because no one's really able to catch it.
This is heartbreaking to think that, you are a trusted person. And all of a sudden, these people are taking advantage of someone with dementia, someone who is ill, someone who has had their power taken away from them. So, how big a problem is this?
It's really hard to tell because it's highly underreported, but estimates range from about $4 billion a year to about $100 billion a year in North America annually. What we do know from the data is that about 1 in 10 seniors is an impact of some form of abuse. The majority of those cases are actually financial abuse. And then about 70% of the time, it's someone who's known to the person. So usually an adult child or a caregiver. And then the amounts that are stolen, unfortunately, the closer the person is to you, the more they can take. So the average amount stolen can exceed $100,000 in a lot of cases.
So this is disturbing.
Yes.
And one of the questions I want to ask, why does it happen, other than the fact that it's easy money for certain people? But why does this happen?
I think because there's no one really watching it. It's sort of a crime of opportunity. So, obviously the phone scammers, that's a separate category. They are preying on these people because they know they're vulnerable and they're there. I think for adult children, first of all, it's a temptation. They know they're not really being watched. They know it's something they can do without really being caught immediately. So it's a bit of temptation. I think also seniors are very reluctant to report things that are happening to them. There's a lot of shame and stigma.
A lot of people are embarrassed when they are scammed or something happens to them like this. So, a loved one has stolen money from them. There's so much shame that comes with that. And it's a shame that it is because they need to tell people and warn them.
It's unfortunately people feel that way. People really should be talking about it. And one thing I'm a huge proponent of is more transparency and more less awkward conversations. I think people should be talking about this stuff more and more openly to begin with. And actually, when I'm talking about this, which I do to people all the time, this is what I do. When I raise the topic of it, almost everybody has a story from their own family or someone that they know. So it actually is very common. People just don't talk about it.
So I can see why it's so challenging to detect, but why is it so challenging to detect?
So first, I think, again, there's a lot of shame and stigma attached to it. So people don't necessarily want to report that they've been victimized. In some cases, if the senior is able to say what happened to them, they don't necessarily want to get their adult child in trouble.
Right.
So they won't necessarily file a police report or go through the steps necessary to do that. In other cases, a senior actually can't report it because they're vulnerable, whether because of capacity issues, sort of issues that are happening to them as they get older, or
And
things
fear as
like
well.
Fear is one thing, also dependency. So people are often dependent on the person that is taking care of them. So that case I mentioned earlier before the break, this youngest daughter moved into the house and mom was effectively entirely dependent on the daughter. So this abuse, unfortunately, it also is very, very closely tied to physical abuse, emotional abuse,
Erin,
and other forms
hold
of
on
neglect.
to that. Just hold on to that. We'll be right back with more of elder financial abuse. We're discussing elder financial abuse, the trusted person contact, and how to recognize and prevent it. Now, Erin, I'm sorry I had to cut you off before we went to break, but we were talking about why it's so challenging to detect. Mm-hmm. So did you have anything else to say about that?
Well, the last reason is sometimes the person's actually complicit in their abuse. So if they're actually being manipulated, if someone is taking advantage of them, they may not necessarily be able to say something's going on or even identify the abuse. So recently I was talking to somebody who works in a bank and her entire job is just to protect seniors from this type of abuse. And she was in a situation, or her client was in a situation with a phone scammer who convinced him that he was transferring money as part of a police investigation and he was going to get all this money back. So he kept on trying to transfer money out and they kept on stopping it because they knew it was a scam. They were aware of it. They're doing everything they possibly can to protect this man. And he believed the scammer more than the bank employees, people close to him, even the actual police who got involved to try to take care of it. Yeah. So sometimes it's really hard because the person themselves doesn't have the ability to actually understand what's going on with them. And it's scary and heartbreaking.
So you have, you mentioned abuse a few times now. Mm-hmm. What are the red flags? Like, what are the warning signs of abuse?
So unfortunately, there's no sort of clear, obvious indicators because, again, there's a wide range of types of abuse. There's a wide range of types of victims and things that are happening, but changes in living situations. So, for example, somebody moving in with you, I think the death of a spouse or something that makes a person vulnerable, having sort of suddenly being isolated, so cutting out people from their lives that were important to them, any kinds of gifts that are out of character, so suddenly making large financial gifts to friends or family members that seem out of character. And there's a case in BC a number of years ago where there was an elderly man basically spent $250,000 on his grandson, and he was basically bankrolling his grandson's lifestyle. Wow. So things like that are concerns. Otherwise, things that are missing from the home, so maybe jewelry, other things that are important to the person or things that are of value are missing. Also changes in personal grooming habits, activities they like to participate in, or just other signs of vulnerability. So anything that really causes a red flag or gives you a reason to be concerned, it's probably a good idea to dig deeper and see what's happening.
So what's the profile of an abuser?
That's one of the hard things. So a lot of research has been done into this. And unfortunately, there's no typical victim and there's no typical abuser.
Every question I've asked you, it's hard. It's hard to detect.
It's so hard.
This is difficult.
Yeah, one of my favorite quotes is from someone in the UN, and they're talking about an expert, and she's saying it's really hard for financial services professionals to detect this because it's just all the factors are working against them. But in terms of a typical abuser, again, you might say, oh, obviously it's someone who needs money. So someone who's going through a divorce or unemployment or has an addiction issue, maybe they have a greater need for the money. But equally, it's somebody who basically is just put in a position of power and has the ability to take money from their parents. So maybe it's an early inheritance and I'm going to get the money one day and I need it now. So I'm just going to help myself a little bit. And it kind of can be a slippery slope, sort of descending into I'm taking way more than I should. And you just never really get off that.
And victim-wise, what's a typical victim? Clearly it's someone who's a senior, someone who has lost some of their cognitive responses, someone who is going through dementia. Is there anyone else that we should be looking out for?
I think you should actually be looking out for everybody. So everybody who's a senior and is potentially in a vulnerable position. So, and if you lose, for example, your spouse and you suddenly are lonely and you need support in that way, maybe someone doesn't have actual dementia yet, or they don't have any clinical symptoms, but they're just starting to not necessarily have the same level of judgment that they once had. So I think it's just paying attention to signs around the margins.
So I've heard the term rogue power of attorney, and we talked about power of attorney.
We did.
What's the difference?
So it's actually worse than that. So powers of attorney are called a license to steal. So it's kind of a catch-22 because a power of attorney is a best practice. It's something that I recommend everybody has to make sure that if you are no longer able to make decisions for yourself, there's a plan in place so someone can actually do that for you right away. The challenge, though, is that, first of all, there's no way to know that a power of attorney document is valid. So the person accepting the document has to assure themselves that this is the right document at the right time. So they have no way to actually know, is this the right document? Is this valid? Is this the right time? Are there other documents out there? So just like I said in that first case I had, the sons had a joint power of attorney. The daughter got a new power of attorney. The person who gets the power of attorney from the daughter has no idea that the other one exists. So there's no registry or tracking system for them. So that's the first problem. Second problem is there's no real formal oversight of people who are acting as an attorney. So essentially, they can basically do whatever they want to do. I mean, there are parameters in place. They should be following certain rules, but it's actually very hard outside of egregious behavior to really sort of hold them accountable. So depending on what province you're in, it depends on who's able to actually step up.
Erin, what guidance are people generally given to protect themselves?
I think that's one of the most frustrating things for me is that the advice that's given, generally somebody has to be not vulnerable to actually follow it. So it's things like open your own mail. Don't sign anything you don't know. Like, do not sign something if you don't know what you're signing. Be careful of, who you're working with or who you're interacting with. Like all of these things that you're basically asked to do, you have to actually be in a position where you're capable of doing that. So if you actually are in a position of vulnerability, you can't do that stuff. That's the problem.
Right. And that's the problem with that advice. It's very limited and there's nothing you can do about it.
I think everybody in this field is doing their best. I think everybody is trying their hardest to try to protect seniors, and they want to make sure that everybody is taken care of. But there's a lot of gaps in terms of our enforcement system and in terms of the tools that we have available to really protect seniors.
So can you tell me a bit about Lighthouse Registry? I know that this is new and you are so passionate about it. So what exactly is it and what does it do?
So it's a tool for financial services providers. So basically financial gatekeepers, think your bank, your investment advisor, real estate agent, people who are dealing with your assets, to basically help them identify potential cases of abuse. So we will take on your trusted contact person. We will take on all your key documents. So for example, your power of attorney. We can also help protect your real estate from illegal transactions or financing. So essentially it's a tool, it's a platform. Again, we are new, so we're not a lot of places yet, but we're very excited about what we're doing.
So what do you recommend people do right now to protect themselves?
A few things. So obviously the trusted contact person is very important. I think speaking with your financial services providers and make sure you put that in place right away.
May I just interrupt you for a moment?
Yes.
Because the trusted contact person, some people may think, well, I don't want to put somebody in there because I don't want them to know my business. And even though we've said that that trusted person will not know the amount in the account, they will not have trading authority, they will not have any authority to do anything, people are still afraid.
I think it's normal to have that fear. This is a new thing. People don't necessarily like sharing these types of details with strangers or having their friends or close family members provide that information or really know what's going on that level. I think the best thing to do is really talk to your financial advisors, go in, speak with them, learn more about the requirement, do some research on your own. And I think you'll see that the consent that you sign, the powers they're given, it's really a tool to help them protect you as opposed to sharing information about you or giving someone some sort of authority over you and your affairs.
So is there anything else people can do to practice, and I love this, proper estate planning hygiene?
So yeah, first of all, have your estate plan set. So have your powers of attorney, have your trusted contact person, have your will, have all those things done. But then don't just do it and put it in a drawer and forget about it. I think it's a good idea to actually look into these things every few years, because just like your life at 50 is very different at 70, plans you made at 50 may no longer be relevant. So it's important to look into it and make sure, is this the person that I want to be my trusted contact? Is this the person I want to be my power of attorney? Has someone moved? Has someone passed away? Is someone no longer able to fulfill that role? So essentially, it's great first step, because a lot of people don't have these plans to begin with, but a great first step is to do these things. But then once you do them, to make sure you continue to review them to make sure they're actually relevant to your life.
And we've got about 25 seconds left, and I think it's really, really important just to recap the red flags, because we talked about them before, but I think it's a really good way to end.
So things like someone being isolated, a new person moving into your home or the senior's home, changes in sort of personal hygiene, caregiving, things going missing from the home. I think we talked about sort of people being cut out of the person's life as well. So isolation.
Thank you
That's
so
a big
much,
one.
Erin.
Thank you.
Elder financial abuse is any improper conduct done with or without the informed consent of the senior that causes the senior to lose money. So what can seniors do to protect themselves? First, take advantage of the tools that already exist. Put in place a trusted contact person with your financial institutions so that they are better positioned to protect you. Next, make sure your estate plan is up to date, including your powers of attorney. Also, do not sign anything without fully understanding what it is, and seek out additional advice if you have any questions. Finally, tell people your plans. Ultimately, any signs of cognitive decline suggest that a person may be more vulnerable to exploitation. It would be most helpful to stay close with the seniors in your life and learn more about how you can support them as concerns arise. Let's look out for our seniors and protect them. I'm Elizabeth Naumovski, and I'm trying to empower you and make frugality fashionable. Bye for now.